Yep, you're good to go, Don.
Awesome, thanks. So I'm going to I started to moderate these a little bit while Donna was out, so I'll continue one more time. And I just want to welcome Matt Regusci, who's going to talk to us about how farms can prepare for the FSMA traceability rule that starts in 2026. Our general instructions are the same today as they always are. Participants are muted. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the meeting. You should feel free to use the chat box to ask questions, and we'll have adequate time afterward for answering and discussing those questions. The session is recorded. We just hit record. We will share the presentation and the resources that Matt's going to share with us during the on our website after the call. And then just a reminder that the viewpoints and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect legal, especially legal advice. The views or positions of PSA members and any entities that are represented. So this is an informative webinar. Matt knows more than just about anybody on FSMA 204. Jonna Hepner from iFood helped set it up, and iFood has put out just a tremendous amount of helpful documentation to help the entire food system understand FSMA 204. So with that, Matt, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and I'll drop the slides and let you start sharing your slideshow.
Awesome. It's funny. It's the big green button is the one I can never see.
I don't know how often I have gone to share screen, explained what I was doing, and then I have not hit the large green button.
Hi, do you guys see the presentation?
It's all visible.
Perfect. Fantastic. All right. Well, I am Matt Regusci. I'm a principal compliance officer at New Era Partners. One of my partners, Andy Kennedy, helped write the rule. Before that, he worked at Food Logic, and he and Frank Giannis know each other fairly well. So he moved over with Frank Giannis and helped write this rule. He came out of the FDA and said, hey, there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to need help with FSMA 204. He's the guru of FSMA 204, and I understand how to do supply chain compliance because that's what my whole entire career is. So it's great talking to you guys because you guys are at the forefront of supply chain compliance, particularly at the farming level. So my past history is I was a co-founder of Azul. After working with Primus Labs for a couple of years, I co-founded Azul and helped write the standard Primus GFS. And then from there, ended up creating a certification body. It was moved over to a company called NCSI, then got bought by BSI, and I ultimately did a management buyout and merged it with a company called WQS. We built that up to be one of the largest certification bodies for food compliance in the Western Hemisphere, from Brazil and Chile all the way up to Canada, doing Global Gap, Primus GFS, SQF, BRC, animal welfare audits. We acted like the USDA in Brazil, doing meat inspections, et cetera, et cetera. So from there, sold that company, became a consultant, and that's what I'm doing now is consulting companies with FSMA 204 compliance. Here's the timeline, right? So FSMA passed many moons ago. The proposed rule just came out recently for FSMA 204. The final rule is in enforcement in January 20th, 2026. So we've already had about a little over a year of companies reviewing the rule, FSMA 204, the new traceability rule that the FDA came out. And now companies are major retailers and food service companies are really starting to figure out how are they going to implement this rule for themselves and their supply chain. Enforcement will be January 20th, 2026, but the FDA has already come out and announced that they're going to enforce, they're going to educate through enforcement or enforce through education. So nothing's going to come down like a whip right off the bat. But we're already receiving a lot of information from retailers and food service companies that they're starting to implement this. They're going to be implementing it this year and next year to be testing all their simple systems to make sure that they are in compliance come January 20th, 2026. I get this asked a lot from my clients. Well, what's going to happen if, I don't comply? Are they going to write the FDA? They tend to do that. They tend to write letters, very, very mean, enforced letters that are public to all of consumers. And nobody wants that, particularly major brands. So yeah, they're interested in getting this done. There are a lot of new acronyms that were created in this whole new rule that I'm going to explain in the next slide. And two of them are CTEs and KDEs. But the rule itself needs to be in the framework of that, has to have standard language, has to have linking information of lot codes from the very beginning to the consumer, electronic and paper records. And this is the main action item that the FDA is asking for. They're asking for a sortable spreadsheet with all the information that they need within 24 hours. So retailers, food service companies, when the FDA comes a knocking, they need to be able to provide them a sortable spreadsheet of all the traceability data within 24 hours. So that's the big ask, because I don't know, maybe there is a company out there that can do that now, but all the ones that we have talked to, they cannot do that now. And the reason why the FDA is doing this is for faster product identification and removal. So this is prior to recall. This is during investigation. The FDA and the CDC think perhaps there is an issue with these certain products. And so they're coming to the retailers and the food service companies, and they're asking over a certain length of time, say 2 weeks, I need to have all the information on the tomatoes and the jalapenos and the red onions that you sold, because it links back to some salsa that 30 people who got sick with salmonella ate. And so they're going to try to figure out where it came from. Some new language that we have: CTEs and KDEs. So CTE stands for Critical Tracking Event. This is the actual event of harvesting, cooling, initial packing, first land-based receiving, that's for the seafood side, shipping and receiving a product. Transformation is processing. So product has already been initially packed. There's a lot code on that, goes to a processing plant. They're now receiving multiple different products, commingling them, creating a new product that now has a new lot code. That is transformation. Another way of looking at transformation is you are bringing in repacking boxes into new boxes, which now has a new lot code. That is also transformation as well. So repacking is potentially transformation as well. So key data elements are needed for each of those different key critical tracking events. So those key data elements are all the data that is needed, which we'll go through in a little bit. Most of it is from the bioterrorism rule. So there's 8 pieces of data. 6 of them are already on your bill of lading, most likely. But there's 2 new ones that we'll discuss next. And those are the hard ones that everybody's trying to wrap their hand around about how they're going to get. The KDEs, the required, would vary depending upon the different critical tracking events. And we'll go through that as well. Obviously, on the farm harvesting side, those critical tracking events are going to be, those are different than the initial packing, which are different than shipping and receiving. So the data collected, stored, and moved are going to be different depending upon what you are doing in the supply chain. Some more definitions: the traceability lot. This means a batch or lot of food that has been initially packed for raw agricultural commodities. This is also product that has been received on the seafooding side or transformed. So anytime there's a location, physical location that's doing something to product, that's a traceability lot. Traceability lot code is that descriptor, often alphanumeric, used uniquely to identify that traceability lot. Traceability lot code source is that place that that lot code was assigned. We're going back and forth on the FDA about is if the office of a lettuce or strawberry provider is creating labels that they are then sending to the farm or ranch to be picked. Is the traceability lot code source the actual office or is it the actual farm? Right now they're saying it's the farm, but we're trying to get it to the office because that would be who they would call, right? The FDA is not going to be calling the lot of that farmer if they have an issue. But right now the FDA is saying that lot code source is that farmer and is that lot, but mainly that farmer. The traceability lot code source reference is the ability at which the FDA can call that physical location to get the information that they need for their research of that outbreak. So this would be their phone number, the FDA number, their physical address, the contact name, email address, that type of stuff. So establishing and assigning traceability lot codes. This is going to be assigned if you initially pack or you perform land-based receiving or you're transforming food in any way. So where it is being initially packed, that could be in the field, that could be at the packing house, that could be at the processor. You know, they're receiving bulk and then they're processing out. New traceability lot codes cannot be established during shipping and receiving. So the idea is that we're tracing that lot code and that lot code source from the beginning all the way to the consumer, regardless of how many times that product changes hands. So they shouldn't be messing, if they're shipping and receiving, that should not be adding a new lot code. Why is this being done? This is being done because the FDA and the CDC, it takes like 40, 60 days, sometimes 10 years. The listeria one with seafood, I mean, not seafood, cheese that just came out right now, 10 years to figure out where the actual source of the product that is in the middle of outbreak came from. And sometimes they never figure it out because the supply chain is very, very complicated. So they want to utilize this data and be able to ask and get this data very, very fast in a very specific format to be able to make their recall or their outbreak investigations much faster so they can get the product off the shelf via recall much faster. Yeah, we get this question all the time. Am I exempt? Almost everybody is not exempt. Like, no, most people or companies are not going to be exempt. You are exempt if you fall under the USDA expectation. So meat, poultry, and certain egg producers. Everything that falls under the FDA for certain commodities, and there'll be another thing too. Everything that falls under the FDA for certain commodities on the FTL, Food Traceability List, another new acronym, Food Traceability List, is required to be part of this rule unless you are a very small farm with sales of no more than $25,000 over the previous 3 years. So very few companies are like that. Small retail establishments, farms selling food directly to consumers. So if you have a CSA and that's all that you do, you're fine. Because like that consumer can go like, hey, I got from this product. And if there is a recall of that product, then it's going to be all the people that came from that CSA, right? So it will not most likely be multi-state. It's going to be a very regional recall and outbreak investigation. Certain foods produced and packed on the farm, food that receives certain type of processing, which has a kill step. So if the product is being killed, has a kill step, so all the pathogens and mold and yeast and all that stuff is being killed off, then you're good. Transporters of food, so like the actual truck drivers. Foods not listed on the FDL, the Food Traceability List, which we'll go on to the next slide, and certain restaurants. There is this really cool, and by the way, I think Don said, and I assumed that this was the case, that everybody's going to be receiving this presentation. I pack this thing full of resources for you guys to utilize at the end of this as well, and just to have as a resource for all of your trainers and growers that you work with, grower, packer, shippers. This is a cool little nifty tool that was created specifically for figuring out if you are exempt. So you just walk through this tool and it will tell you if you're exempt or not. I'm not gonna walk through it, but I put this slide here with the website on there so you can utilize that. Here are the commodities that are on the FDA Food Traceability List. So soft cheeses, shelled eggs. I like they say shelled eggs from chickens. So I guess pigeons and quail eggs and stuff. No, they're exempt, but turkey eggs exempt, duck eggs, I guess exempt. Just the shelled eggs from chickens. Nut butters, you can thank Peanut Corp of America for this one. That was a massive, crazy outbreak. Nut butters are ubiquitous. They're in everything. There really isn't a kill step. There's a lot of times a kill step to make the actual nut butters, but then when you're adding and commingling the nut butter into a whole bunch of different products, then it loses that kill step. So unless there is a kill step after the product has been created with the nut butter, it is not exempt. Cucumbers, herbs, leafy greens, melons, peppers, sprouts, tomatoes, tropical tree fruits, fresh cut fruit and vegetables. So anything that's been fresh cut that doesn't have a kill step, even if they're not on this list, is part of this list. So like if you're making baby carrots, for instance, the bulk carrots, not on this list. Baby carrots, on this list. Yeah. And then a bunch of different seafood, ready-to-eat salads, and then any type of product that contains these ingredients that doesn't have a kill step, and they have like, Reese's on there, or whatever product that is with peanut butter in it. Okay, so again, because of the bioterrorism rule, right? Bioterrorism rule, anybody who's doing any type of GFSI audit or even any real GMP or GAP audit, you're going to have some sort of mock recall type of question in there. That's coming from the bioterrorism rule. You need to be able to track who you sold to and who you bought from, right? One step forward, one step back. That's part of the bioterrorism rule. How you do that is with those top 6 things, right? My ship to location, the reference document, like the bill of lading, the ship from location, the product description, the shipment date or receiving date, and the quantity and unit measure, right? Because you have to know how much you need to call back. That is on everything. The FDA is now asking for 2 new things. One is that traceability lot code and that traceability lot code source. And that has to be collected from the beginning of the supply chain all the way through to the end. So yeah, that's complicated. It's not an easy fix because most of the systems through the supply chain are not actually set up to capture that information. So anybody who's going through or has done PTI, Produce Traceability Initiation, not initiation. It's not a sorority or a fraternity. The Produce Traceability Initiative, PTI, and you say, hey, I've been doing this for a decade and nobody's actually collecting the information, you're accurate. You're right. They haven't been. Now they have to, because the PTI or these labels here, this is really going to be this is the information now that the industry is looking for. So here, oh no, I can't grab that. But below, I don't know if you can see my mouse. This is where a lot of times they'll have the actual location source would be here too as well. So that's the only thing that PTI is not collecting well, is that traceability lot code source, but that can be here as well. And that traceability lot code source, again, attaching directly to the actual physical location of where that was packed, transformed, um, packed or transformed. That location doesn't have to be on here, but there could be like a URL that directs the FDA, like it would be a password and username protected URL. And the FDA could go to that URL. They would have their own login, or anybody with an FDA.com email address would be able to get that. And then they would be able to get that source by clicking on that link and putting the information in and find it. So if you want to save it, if you don't want anybody knowing where that location is throughout the supply chain, you can create ways of hiding that information. But the FDA has to have access to it like that. Yeah, so this is what they're looking for. They're looking for that. This is why GS1 is kind of leading the charge on this. A lot of retailers and food service companies are aligning towards GS1. Not 100%. There will be some, there's going to be pushback to that. So there will be some exemptions depending upon the supplier, but for the most part, this is what the retailers and food service companies are asking for. So you need a G10, your lot code number or batch number. And then this is how that 4-digit number, that 2483, that's a voice pick code number. That's how a lot of distribution facilities are actually going to track what they received on that bill of lading when they receive that product, and they have that. Now they're capturing that GS1 barcode or PTI barcode. They're capturing that information when it comes in. They're going to use that number, that unique number, as a way of verifying that they're grabbing the right product and then collecting that data for shipping, so that when they create their shipping labels. Here's another just matrix of what goes into creating those expectations. And here's an example of an electronic sortable spreadsheet. This is an FDA example. PTI has their own as well. You can actually go to PTI. I think I added that into this now that I'm thinking about it. If not, I can put it into this before I send it over. PTI has a whole bunch of examples of electronic sortable spreadsheets that you could download and utilize as well. But you can see, like, there's the traceability lot code, there's the quantity unit of measure, the product description, the immediate previous source location, receiving location description, receiving date, the traceability source location. And so then you can see, like, there's different links on there. So you could send that link up, and then the FDA can just click on that link and go directly to where that source is, if you don't want to actually put the address on the location. Again, this is where you're going to get like a sales order or a bill of lading. This is where you would get all that information. And then that's where you would get it on the actual either pallet or case label. Hopefully on the case, but some companies may end up utilizing pallet tags if they can't get it to the case. Problem with just the pallet is the picking side of things. If you're shipping in pallets and then it gets commingled within the distribution facility somehow, then they've lost everything. Or if you're shipping in a pallet that has multiple lots on, you have multiple cases with multiple lots on that pallet, then it's going to get lost if it's not at the case level. So here's an example from the FDA, and the FDA has a whole bunch of examples too. So you can go through and find a bunch of different examples, but this gives you an idea of Each one of those is a critical tracking event, right? So you have farm, harvester, cooler, initial packing, produce processor, distributor, and retail source. And so this is showing you what type of KDEs you're going to have to capture at each of those different spots. So the processor is going to be capturing the receiving KDEs, the transformation KDEs, right? Because what products do they receive? And if they commingled anything in that processing, they have to capture all that. Then they're creating a new lot code. Think of like a bag salad, for instance. They're going to create a new lot code, and then that lot code now will be on that shipping KDE as it goes out. And then the distributor is going to receive that, and then they're going to ship it. So when they receive in full pallets or mixed pallets, they're going to be mixing their own pallets, and then they're going to be sending that off in the shipping record. And that retail establishment or that restaurant is going to be doing retail KDEs. So it kind of gives you an idea of how it follows up the chain. Don, you popped up. Do you want to ask anything or?
No, actually, I did not mean to hit that button, but
Okay.
I just wanted to wave and say hello to you.
Aye. So when we are looking at individual records at the farm level, what they're looking for is the farm name. Oh, actually, before that, when we go back to here, there's that blue bar across the top of the whole entire thing, and it says traceability plan. The first thing the FDA lists out in the FSMA 204 rule is a traceability plan. So you have to have a traceability plan that meets FSMA 204 expectations. And you need that for every part of the supply chain. So the harvester is going to have their own traceability plan. The farm's going to have his own traceability plan. And it's going to be very similar to what is expected for GFSI. So it's not like you need a whole new one. GFSI, like food safety audits. If you're doing like Global Gap or Primus GFS or SQF farm audits, it's going to be the same type of expectations on that traceability plan, but there is going to be some key differences. So you don't have to completely change everything out and create a whole new one, but you do have to make some edits. So I wanted to call that out. But here's what's expected in that, and this is straight from the FDA's website. I mean, this actual table is a little different, but yeah, they're going to want to know the farm name, the address, the city, state, zip code, all the stuff that's already on a farm map that you're doing for Primus GFS or Global Gap. It's going to be the exact same thing. They have GLN optional here, but your customers may say differently because they're going to have to track it. So again, it's looking like it's going to be GS1 is the unique identifier that they're going to use for the most case. So if you don't already have a GLN, you might want to start looking into getting that now. And then the GLN extensions are going to be for each individual field that you have. So right now we're showing 4 different lots, like on a ranch. So if you have, or a farm, if you have a farm map or a ranch map and you're calling out individual lots, then those would be GLN extensions. Here's an example of how you would populate those CTE records, critical tracking event records. So the initial packing location and name. So this would be like if you have a packing house too, or what the packing house would collect from their growers. What the commodity is, what the variety of the commodity is, the quantity and unit of measure. It's like 1,000 cases. If it's bins, it'd be like 3 bins, whatever. Farm where the food was actually harvested. It could be the farm name. It could be for the farm number. It could be the GLN. The field where the food was harvested makes sense, right? So it's going to be the farm name or farm number, and then the actual GLN distinct extension, or the farm name or number, whatever is created. So packing houses, because you're creating your own lot code, if you have your own GLN and you're creating your own lot codes, and you're just having farmers send to you bulk, or you're harvesting, you're sending your own harvest crews out, they're packing it and sending it in bulk, then you're going to be tracking this internally. So the farmer doesn't have to have a GLN. If you have your own, you obviously have your own way of tracking that. You just have to make sure that you're now the one, when the customers are saying, I want a GLN number, your facility has that and your own lot codes. The harvest date, the reference stock, and number. So like whatever the document is that you use to reference. And then obviously, just like any log for food compliance, you have to put your name or sign it and then the date. Ooh, I'm going to go back to this label real quick because I want to point something out as well. If you have a field where you go back and collect multiple times, let's say asparagus, blueberries, strawberries, different types of lettuces, you're going to want to make sure that you have the pick date or the pack date on this as well, because they may have an investigation on product that you picked one time, not the whole entire time, right? So if you're going back and repicking again, you want to be able to distinguish the difference of when you picked it. Maybe it's a systemic issue and it was something on the field, and say you added fertilizer and the fertilizer was a bad batch of fertilizer, or you watered and it was a bad batch of water, right? You had a bunch of ducks in there and now you have salmonella in the water. It didn't die off with whatever you used to treat it. You sprayed it on there. But then over a period of time, right, now there is no salmonella or E. coli or whatever on that water, or the salmonella and E. coli got outcompeted by other bacteria on your bad batch of fertilizer, organic fertilizer. And so now, pick 2, 3, 4 no longer has that issue. You want to be able to call that out, right? Because then you're not recalling as much product. And the FDA knows, then you can also pinpoint the reason why easier. That's not required, but it's, I don't know, it's just something else to add. Okay. That's it for the main part of this presentation. I wanted to have a lot of extra time for questions, but also I want to walk through a lot of the resources that I have here as well for this that you guys can utilize. And I don't think I put Don and Jonna, remind me to add this. I think I don't think I have. I don't. I need to add the PTI resources here as well. But one of the biggest issues, friction, inertia, you might say, with the actual FSMA 204 rule, is that it's so damn long. It's like 600 pages long. The rule itself is, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so pages long, but then there's like 550 pages of comments, and where the FDA is explaining in minutia and extreme detail how you comply with very, very specific use cases. So you'll open that up and it takes them like 20 minutes to download. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I'll get to this tomorrow. So there's a lot of manana complex with this because it's just such a big rule. So that's a big issue. Another challenging thing that we find is just the enforcement date, right? It's like, it's 2 years from now. And then really, truly, what is the FDA going to be doing, right? Blah, blah, blah. Well, like I said previously, the FDA will write letters. The FDA is going to educate enforcement through education in the beginning, but they're still going to be asking for the deliverables. So if the retailer and food service companies cannot provide a 24-hour spreadsheet, electronic sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours, the FDA is going to be like, okay, when can you get it to us? If they say 2 months, no, there's going to be zero sense of humor on the FDA's part for that. If they say a week, the FDA is still going to be frustrated. So it's really trying to whittle it down to days, hopefully a day. And if not, the FDA again is going to write a letter, and then those letters ruin brands because people read them. Another question is, am I covered by the rule, or all my suppliers covered? And we kind of went through that. What do I do if I'm covered by the rule, but some of my suppliers are not? That's a huge one, right? Particularly the further up the chain you go. And there's going to be a lot of customers asking for the same thing. So I was just in a meeting right beforehand. We were talking about trying to get suppliers on board for FSMA 204. And I said, the first couple retailers and food service companies that come out, like Kroger is the first, they have written a letter. That might be something I add to this too, Don. As I'm talking this through, I'm adding more resources. Kroger did come out with a letter. They did come out with expectations. And it's not too far off of what we've been consulting companies to do. And they're being beat up over it. And it's like the first few are just going to get beat up. And then after 10 or 12, everybody's going to be like, okay, yes, this is what I'm going to have to do. This makes sense. I talked a lot about how GS1 standards fit in, talked a lot about the difference between the batch code and traceability lot code. How are my peers meeting the requirements of the rule? I always like to ask these questions to make sure I didn't miss anything. And in the very beginning, there was a lot of questions about, are the retailers and food service companies going to be asking for different things? Right now, I can tell you through our consulting that while they may ask for different ways of capturing the information, they are all aligning on the information needing to be captured. And that is what I presented in this presentation. So that is not going to change. Most likely, all the big guys are coming out, and all the smaller, medium-sized guys are following suit on what the big guys are doing, and they're all aligning around that GS1 type of numbers. And when I say there may be different ways of capturing that information, Kroger's asking for ASN, advanced shipment notices, via EDI, which is kind of like a bank transfer, electronic transfer of information directly to them. So Kroger is going to handle everything in-house. They want all of their data sent to them directly for each one of their suppliers. Some companies are looking at utilizing third-party software. That's what iFoodDS does. We're doing third-party software with IBM is our machine, IBM Food Trust, and we're the front end capturing all that information to feed the machine and connect with everybody. So there may be different ways in which the data is captured, but everybody's aligning on what data needs to be captured. What will this cost? Luckily for the majority of the supply chain, it's not going to cost that much money. It is going to cost something if you haven't done anything. Like if you haven't done PTI at all, then yeah, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you a certain amount of money to create a GLN and GS1 numbers. They're genuinely pretty small. If you're smaller, if you're bigger, it's going to cost a little bit more, but it's not astronomical. And then depending upon the software that's being used or how many different connections you have with different customers, that may vary as well. But we're talking about anywhere from nothing if you're a small supplier to a few $1,000s if you're a bigger supplier a year annually. Okay, so I wanted to put some resources here on different places you can go to check out the rule yourself. So here is the actual landing page for the FDA on the FSMA rule. Here's a landing page for the frequently asked questions. We've created like a cheat sheet. So this is like the rule in 2 pages. So these are all hyperlinks to the actual rule. So like, how do you develop a traceability plan? If that's one of the questions you have, just click on that link and they'll tell you everything that you need in your traceability plan. Assigning traceability lot codes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down the list. So you don't actually have to download the rule and read it. You just have to click on the hyperlinks of whatever your question is, and you have it right there at your fingertips. Here's some more resources and hyperlinks to those resources. And then I've been writing a lot. Chat GDP does not help with brand new laws that have not been created. So a lot of content has been created on our website, generated by me. My competitors will be able to use Chat GDP to pull my information, steal it, and create their own blogs. But yeah, if you want to go over here, there's a ton of resources to New Era Partners /insights. And that's it.
Matt, do you want to keep sharing screen in case you want to flip back, or do you want to stop sharing screen and we can see your lovely flip face in full size during our discussion segment?
What do you think would be best? It doesn't
Um,
matter to me. I can go either way.
let's stop share
Okay,
and then either of us can regain share as needed, I suppose.
perfect.
One thing that I was a lot, much of what you said. Well, first, thank you for all the resources and for that great rundown of what the rule is going to require. Several times in the conversation, you made reference to you're already doing this for Bioterrorism Act, you're already doing this for Global Gap, but many of the farms that we serve are not covered by Bioterrorism Act. They're not registered. They don't have a Global Gap. They don't even have a GIP gap. And we are, many of the educators on this group, and I even saw some FDA regulators who are in attendance. Many of us need to really educate ourselves about what is the Produce Traceability Initiative, what is GS1, what are these things that you've been talking about. Where would you recommend that a person start? I mean, that in addition to the 600 pages of the traceability rule, the GS1 documentation is it's nothing to be sneezed at. It's complex, lengthy, uses a lot more acronyms like GLN and so on.
Yes.
So where would a person start? And I just wanted your thoughts on that before we went to some other questions.
Yeah. So yeah, so the Produce Safety Initiative asks for like 5 documents, right? And none of those really fit into this. So you're right. If they're smaller companies, they don't do any audits, they are just following FSMA, just following the Produce Safety Alliance, then yeah, there's going to be
This is new to a lot. I mean,
this is new.
entirely new to a lot of people.
Right, right. And that's where it's going to come down to really the packing houses helping their growers out. Um, and I've even said to some of our distributors that we're working with as well, is you may have to prop up an opco, a co-op, excuse me, to really help some of these smaller growers with collecting the right information. But if the growers are selling bulk directly to the company and they're doing the initial packing, then it's going to be that initial packer that's capturing that information and creating those lot codes that are going to be sent up, right? That's going to be the traceability lot code source. If you are packing in the field and you're the farmer, you're the packer packing in the field, and those cases are going into a cold storage and you own that product, right? We're not talking about a marketing company that may own that product. They're sending their harvest crews out. They're packing that. That's different. You're the farmer. You own that product. You packed it in the field. It's going through into cold storage and distribution. Then yeah, you're going to have to be following these rules because you're creating that traceability lot code. You're that initial packer, and you're sending it out. And I would say PTI is huge and extremely helpful for that. If you're a produce packer, produce grower, PTI is a great place to go to look at that.
So for an educator, I mean, a lot of times the farms go to extension or other trusted parties
Yep.
as their first connection. They may not go to their buyer or their regulator to ask their questions.
Right. Nobody goes to their regulator to ask for
No,
questions.
nobody goes to the regulator first.
We keep saying that though. We tell people like if you have a question, ask the FDA because the FDA does have a process to answer questions.
And they are very quite responsive to those things.
Yes,
And
it may take a little longer than what you want them to do, but yeah, they are responsive because
but
they're trying to figure out how to make this rule work.
Mhm.
So everybody's figuring it out. Like come day one, uh, the FDA is going to be learning through this process just as much as everybody else. They have their expectations, they know what they want, but actually getting that information in the way at which they want it
Mhm.
um, um, is different than how they may receive it. So everybody's working it out.
So just two messages I'm hearing for the educators on the call are number one, the buyer is probably going to be trickling down how they want the grower to do it. And number two, it's well worth your effort to become familiar with PTI in terms of what the dominant labeling expectations are going to be.
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks. Um, Betsy and Donna, did you have other questions, or should we go to? I know Jamerson had a question in the chat, and Mike has some questions in the Q&A, and I suspect that Robert probably has questions that he's been asking and would love to get answers to. Anyone who has questions, feel free to raise your hand also if you'd like to raise them, if you'd like to ask them verbally.
Yeah, I would go to the Q&A box or the other ones in the chat box.
Okay, well, let me go to the chat because Jamerson asked a question early on, and it was about small operations. Here we go. Details on small retail establishments for exemption and whether there is an exemption for under 500K, an exemption for percent of distribution centers versus wholesale. Could you give a little bit more detail about a small retail establishment exemption?
You know what? I
Or would you
can't
recommend
remember what
going to
the
the
yeah, I can't remember the exact numbers for the small retail exemption. And I
okay?
don't and I don't want to give out the wrong information, but that is in one of those hyperlinks that I have on the resources of where to go for the extent for the exemptions of that.
Okay. And Jamerson corrected me, he wasn't meaning distribution center, he meant direct to consumer, which in hindsight makes much more sense.
Yeah. If it's direct to consumer, if that's all they do, direct consumer, they're exempt.
And
And Don,
go ahead, Donna.
Don, I think you have a slide on this later, so I just wanted to mention there is an exemption. There is a chart that FDA released that is comparing exemptions in the produce safety rule with those to the food traceability rule. There you go. And I thought that might be something to mention
Yeah,
because
so
that might answer Jameson's question.
Oh, that's great.
yeah, so let me go ahead and just say that on that same page that Matt showed, there's the FDA resources down at the bottom. You can get to, yeah, these are all click downs and you can get
Yep.
all the FDA resources under additional information. There's one called exemptions relevant specifically to farms. And it goes through line by line, the PSR exemption and the traceability rule exemption and how those line up. So that's thank you to Kristen Ash for pointing that out, that it would be useful to people to have access to this during today. She mentioned that yesterday. Can somebody help me with Mike's questions, or Mike, do you want to unmute your, or can we do, Mike, would you be comfortable with us unmuting yourself and you can ask your priority question? I'm just going to give it a second if somebody can reach
Yeah,
Mike.
I can read them out of the box. There's just
Okay, that
several.
would be great. I just didn't know how to prioritize them.
I'll just start at the top, frankly.
Great, thanks.
And I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer this first one because it's asking you to channel your inner FDAer. What are FDA's expectations for reducing the time it takes for them to reduce their investigation time to ID the source of contamination for fresh produce from never to when?
Yeah, actually, I don't have to channel my inner FDA because my partner, who was in the FDA, has used this analogy multiple times.
Okay.
So He obviously, all he did was work on well, not all he did, but what he did mainly was work on the FSMA 204 rule and putting that into action. There was an example of an FDA investigation that took something along the lines of 40 days, somewhere around there. Jonna, you might be able to jump in if you can remember the exact number. But
She had to step away. Yeah.
I think it was like 41 days, something like that. They put all the data in after they had collected everything, right? Because through this investigation, they're collecting all that data by themselves right now, using those bill of ladings, using those sales orders. They're like literally lying it out on the floor and trying to put those pieces together by themselves, like human beings doing this right now. They collected all that information. They put it into an electronic sortable spreadsheet like they're asking for the retailers and food service companies to provide them within 24 hours. They handed it to Andy. He was able to do everything within six days. So from 41 days to 6 days, the investigation would have been. So an exponential decrease in time is what the FDA is looking for their investigation, CDC and FDA, for their investigation process, which obviously, if you could get product off the shelf starting in 6 days versus 41, huge benefit in terms of lives, in terms of health. That might be less people that need kidney transplants, and less people that die, less people that get sick, possibly for the rest of their lives sick, and a lot less lawsuits down as well. So, yeah.
Super, thank you. Do you want me to just keep going or somebody
Sure,
else?
just keep going.
Okay.
I just checked the chat and there was nobody else has chimed in the chat. So I think this is a fruitful way to go through.
Okay. What are the expectations for this? Oh, well, we already talked about that. The reduction, I'm going to go with skipping the next question because it's the expectation would reduce illnesses. I think you already answered that.
Yeah.
Mock recalls are required in most cases if you are a fresh produce shipper. Will a one step forward, one step back be sufficient given this new rule?
Great question. If you are not on the food traceability list, if those products that I showed earlier, yeah, you're still underneath the bioterrorism rule. So that's all you need to worry about is one step forward, one step back.
Unless you're not on the bioterrorism rule, as Don just pointed out, that a lot of people are not.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But there is the difference between, hold on, but one caveat here. There's a difference between what the government wants and what your clients want, right? So already Kroger sent out a letter and said, yeah, I know the whole FTL thing, the food traceability list says this. We're going to expect it from everybody. And a whole lot of the companies that we're talking with right now are having a very hard time distinguishing within their own systems what's on that food traceability list versus what's not. So they're going to be asking for it from most of the companies are going to be disregarding that food traceability list and asking for that data from everybody. So how is that going to change the mock recalls? I think that if you are doing a Primus GFS or a Global Gap or a USDA a harmonized audit or something like that, these new requirements are going to be part of those expectations if you're on that FTL. And so that mock recall is now going to be asking you to trace it back by that lot code and that lot code source as well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this is I'm interested to see how many people are subject to this rule who are selling into markets that are different than the buyers you're talking about, like your Kroger's, right? So there's people that are sourcing maybe restaurants specifically and other places that may or may not have this same kind of approach, but this is all good. It's all good to have this discussion, but I'm just thinking of those people that are maybe niche-y and not in here. Donna, was that a hand raised right there? I'm gonna let you do it and then I'll read the next question.
Yep. So that was actually a great segue into what my question was going to be, is thinking about, so I was looking at the list of participants or attendees for this webinar and recognizing a lot of the names for Matt's benefits. A lot of us work with, I'm going to say, smaller growers. So normally in the produce safety rule, they might be meeting that qualified exemption. They might not be fully covered under the rule, but there is this potential expectation that their buyers are going to make them comply with the requirements in the traceability rule. So a lot of these growers are not necessarily using PTI technology. We're talking like maybe traceability systems with a pricing gun, very pen and paper. I was wondering if you're aware of any discussions happening about resources or solutions being developed for these types of growers so they don't necessarily need to, immediately jump into the software system or some of these larger technologies you're talking about.
Yeah. The answer is no. No, nobody
Okay.
knows what to do with the smaller growers right now. There's the industry right now is trying to figure out how they themselves, retail food service companies, distribution, are going to receive this data that needs to be done and send it appropriately from their top 30% of their suppliers that provide them 70% of their product. So that's where we're at right now. And once that gets figured out, then there's going to be, okay, now how do we then get to that next jump down to make sure that, we're not losing a whole bunch as well.
Okay. Thank you. So is the hope then that decision isn't going to be made December 2025 and then growers are going to have a month to comply? Or
it's probably going to be.
I think that's one of the concerns.
No, right now, everybody's trying to figure out how to do that now, 2023, 2024. 2025 is when everything's going to be tested. And that's like early 2025 is when companies are going to be figuring out how to manage that, that next level down, which is everybody else.
Thanks, Matt. That's super helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have time for another question?
I think that question about what is FDA's staff ramp up might actually be quite interesting if you happen to know any answers to that, Matt.
My guess is they're not. I mean, they haven't really ramped up much since FSMA was created. If this was the FDA's new drug traceability rule, then probably the ramp up would be higher. But the FDA's new food traceability rule, I am guessing not a huge ramp up of people. This is supposed to be the opposite. This is supposed to help them figure out how to deal with investigations using less people, not more people.
That's a great concept. I got two more, and I'm going to try and get in there. Who will FDA be looking for regarding non-compliance when an entity does not or cannot provide the appropriate paperwork?
Yes, the retailers, the food service companies, distribution, major brands. Yeah, that's where they're going to be coming after. Why isn't that you are not able to manage your suppliers well enough to get me the information I need? Which is why it's going to trickle downhill, right? Because the FDA is knocking on the door of where that consumer ate. They don't know the supply chain. So that's where the end of the line, end of the supply, the retailers, food service companies, major distributors, they're going to have to provide this data to the FDA so that they can figure out the supply chain. So if they can't, then it's gonna be really on them. And so they're gonna make buying decisions based upon that, right? So if the grower, packer, shippers, those that are not able to comply with this probably are not going to be getting many contracts after 2027, 2028.
Okay, fantastic. I do want to, I know, Don, you just answered this, and I just want to say it out loud because if people aren't watching the Q&A box, the food traceability rule does not include does not include the concept of a qualified end user, so no qualified exemption, and Don said correct. So, and there you can see this new file that he's sharing.
Exactly. I just wanted to put that on screen because it's very clear in FDA's document that qualified exemption doesn't exist in traceability rule.
Yep. So that's my job here is done. Don, I'm going to let you wrap it up, and I'm just going to say thanks one more time for everybody coming and to a great presentation, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you.
Go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, that was full of information and greatly appreciated, Matt. A couple of housekeeping things. One thing is, in addition to reminding us that FDA's resources are all here, and we will be sharing the presentation and the resources. Matt spent a lot of time compiling a huge amount of resources that will help us all in meeting the needs of farms. PSA created a supplemental slide set in December of 22. We discussed it in a educators call, so you can download that slide set, both either for use during the grower training course or for your own outreach activities as you're trying to describe to growers and farms what the traceability rule entails. It's just 12 slides. And the explanation of how those slides might be presented is both in the notes and in that educators call. Our next educators call is going to be hosted by Donna, because you may have noticed if you've been on the PSA website and looked at the sanitizer selection tool, it looks different now because it's web hosted. We learned a lot as we went through the process of updating that sanitizer selection tool, and Donna's going to go through that. I believe next month. The date will be to be determined. There will be a registration link by email like we always do. Other than that, the PSA website always is a resource for you to try to find things. We try to host useful information like this for the trainers who are working with farms across the country and internationally. And we also have our social media feeds that provide other information. So if we can have everybody wants to hit the clap emoji on their Zoom. Truly appreciate Matt coming here, spending your time with us, and sharing that information. It's been fabulous. Thank you.